Carlow has a really rich history. Carlow Historical and Archaeological Society have been doing sterling work, so we thought, myself and Owen thought it would be very appropriate to launch this project by really recognising the wonderful work that's already been done in Carlow Town in particular in collecting place names. But we're going to kick off today's events with a discussion between Owen and Pat O'Neill, who has been involved in the wonderful Lanes and Streets of Carlow project. So we're going to start off looking at the work that's already been done, documenting the minor names around the town.
Thank you for coming along. Can I just ask you, what made you do this project in the first place, the synthesis of it all?
The streets were still there, but their names had changed. For instance, Green Lane, you're all familiar where it is now. Back in the day, it was known as Love Lane. I have no idea why, but that is a small example. Then we had a list of 29 names where we could prove from historical documents that these places existed. And then on maps we found out where they had been. Our third list was a list of names, I think 10 on the list. We proved that it did exist from historical documents, but we can't locate them. And the final list was, I think, a list of 6. We had names from people, but we couldn't find them in historical documents or on maps. So we're a total of 67 names altogether in our couple of years at it. We did an article then for Carloviana, and it appeared in the 2019 edition on page 97. So you'll find the lists of all the street names there in that article.
Was it a daunting process at any stage to do the project like that?
Not daunting, interesting, yeah, because we didn't know when we started just how many we were ever going to find. We went for the research route as well, but we also talked to local people. We had a public meeting in the library one night about it, inviting people in. We had an exhibition during one of the Heritage Weeks, and we invited people to look at what we'd found so far. And we had query sheets, and they left us queries and what have you. And then another night we invited in older people that we knew would be interested and would remember, and we picked their brains. So it was enjoyable. It wasn't hard work.
Any interesting disagreements on names or?
Yeah, the late Tommy Clark and Jimmy Morn, they provided us an awful lot of initial names, but I remember Tommy, we had a Charlotte Street now was Back Lane or Mosley's Lane. But Tommy, he had several names for it, and I eventually said to Tommy, look, this is ridiculous. At the moment, you suggested 8 names for this place, and
And sometimes more than one name can be the right name, because sometimes places more
with
than
the
one
names
name.
we printed, we do have documentary evidence. Another great source was 2 of our members, Tommy Clark and the late Seamus Murphy, had done research on leases in the town. Old leases in the 18th century, and with the majority of leases, at that stage there might be a very rudimentary map attached, but they always described the property as being on the south side, Back Lane, on the west side, so you were able to place them, and you verified the names that way.
Because I know we were at an event. There was a lovely event organised. I slightly digressed, but last night by the Carlow County Museum at the GAA last night, and they were commenting on the fact of the rule book and how years back in the day, I suppose, for want of a better description, there were about 42 players on the pitch, and they decided, if they had rules about physical contact, shall we say, and arguments, and the play must continue, and they had a way of basically, if there was a draw, I think a county committee would meet and decide themselves on who was the winner. So I'm wondering whether there was a nice amicable solution for some of the disagreements with place names.
We eventually worked out a solution. We didn't have to call in anybody to supervise.
Okay, there's no argy-bargy, no fights. That's good. Well, look, I suppose on that much, can I just ask you also? I mean, I love the fact, and I mean this as the greatest compliment, but I suppose I'm aware there wasn't a heritage officer here. and yet you were doing the project on a very nice model that you were obviously making yourselves. Now, Eve, I suppose, is very well rehearsed in the models and the methodology behind this, which come over to a second. But I just think it was fantastic the way you had done that, and yet it was kind of ahead of its time a little bit.
Well, the three of us were interested in it. It wasn't, as I say, it wasn't hard work. We were genuinely interested in it, and I must say we enjoyed it.
Last question for you. Any favourite name in Carlow? I sound like a DJ now. Is there a favourite? But is there one that really sticks in your head?
Not really, no. Lots of them were names of people, or Scutter's Alley was one, and we didn't find that. We know it existed. One of the great sources we found the ledger of the Fever Hospital from 1832, and when you go to that, they have names and addresses, and a lot of the people who ended up in the Fever Hospital were living in these lanes, and in fact, one of the more interesting ones that we found in there, where you had people with addresses, basement in Dublin Street, the basement flats.
Thank you, Pat, and genuinely thank you for all the work you've done and all your colleagues in the past. But how beneficial have you found Pat's survey for where we are today to go forward with the next project that we're launching?
The survey that's been done already is really fantastic, and the methodology is fantastic. So it's amazing to be able to go and look at the map and see where all these old place names are. And I think it's the perfect jumping off point for where we want to go with the Carlow Placenames Project going forward. My experience is largely in field names, so I coordinated the Louth Field Names Project, and I've done a lot of work in the Cooley Mountains with sheep farmers, so I'm more accustomed to rural minor place names and thinking about how they work in a rural landscape. But it's really interesting to see the similarities in an urban context too, because place names, they're mostly about, these minor place names, they're really about how people make sense of place on the ground. They're much more informal, and they're about what we find important. And as you mentioned, Pat, a lot of them are to do with people. So in an urban context, like, it's people who are important, and maybe who lived there or who held the land. So they give us a lovely little insight into some of the social histories of the town, and how that's changed through time. The street layouts, how the street layouts have changed, and how the names have changed, and the important parts have changed. So we heard today how Bridewell Lane is maybe like a back street now, and how formerly it was much more significant. So yeah, they're great in that respect.
Okay. And can I just ask you, in terms of the project, how will people get involved, or how would you think the best way? What's your plan for people to get involved as we progress this?
So for the project going forward, our plan is to have 3 free workshops, and they're going to be on 3 consecutive Tuesdays, so starting next Tuesday, and I have flyers on the tables there if anybody would like to take one with the dates and the venues. And the first workshop is going to be in Carlow Library, and the subsequent 2 are going to be in Palatine GAA Hall. And those workshops are going to be a little bit of a mix of learning and then very practical and hands-on. So we'll start off just talking a little bit about minor place names, what they are, what their history is, how old they are, what different kind of things can you tell from them. And then we'll get like maps on the tables basically, and we'll have like a real practical session where people can come together and record the names from their own local areas, or can take away maps and kind of touch in that way. One of the really important things is to get things mapped so we know where they are. What we eventually want to do with this project and building on the work that's been done already is to make a digital data set that can be uploaded onto the Placenames branch website, Mehel Loganum. And that will mean that anybody can go and look at this website and see that the names that have been recorded, so that they're not just having them in the library is a really amazing starting point, but for anybody who can go in and who's interested, if you're like your family was from Carlow but you live in New York, you can go into this website and have a look at the names of the old lanes, maybe where your family were from, or that kind of thing. Yeah. So,
do you agree with the methodology? Are you happy with what we're doing? Because you're involved in it, heavily involved in it, I should say as well.
But yeah, place names, rural place names are fine, but if you want to talk about field names, you do need the owners and the occupiers to tell you, because when we were doing the lanes, we were looking for evidential material, old leases, old registrars, what have you, a newspaper report. A field name, you won't find that on the map.
Yeah, you're dead right. That's one of the big differences.
You've got to talk to the owners.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, that's one of the really exciting things about. So like, I suppose just to talk a little bit about field names, like those minor place names in a rural context, they exist in community. They exist in people's mental maps of landscapes, and as Pat says, they're not written down anywhere. They're not, because they don't have an official role in land ownership or land transfer or agriculture, and today even in agricultural management it's farm unit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So they're very much part of this what we would like maybe call like a vernacular landscape. So it's the lived landscape. So if you're out on a farm and you're trying to say the cattle are up in a certain field, you'll say they're up in the high field or in the Crook War, or if you're a sheep farmer in the Coolies, you're trying to say where the sheep are. You have to have landmarks. So they're the landmarks we use to navigate our landscapes. But they encode an awful lot of historical knowledge about the people who've gone before us. There was an example in the Cooley Peninsula. There was a field called the Relic, and a housing development was built, and what do you think they found? A medieval graveyard, you know? So that's a really clear example of a field name that has a medieval origin. But then then you might have a lot of names to do with things like the linen industry, which is an 18th century rural industrial process. So there's all this kind of history encoded in the names. And then it can be right down to, that's Jimmy's field because my uncle Jimmy used to keep his cattle in it. You know, so they really social history, community history, that they're curated within communities over like a long period of time. And because I suppose a little bit like the way the urban landscape's changing in Carlow, and that was one of the impetuses for the Lanes and Streets project. In a rural context, as farming practices are changing, we're losing a lot of these names that have been created for generations. So it's a really nice opportunity to kind of get those down on a map. And they're relevant at multiple levels. They're relevant, like I'm from a rural background in Louth, and the names, the Coach Horse Fields, the Molly's Fields, the High Fields, Goucher's Fields. I have this childhood landscape of where I played that's very personally important to me. But then at a community level, they're significant. And then as a much further remove, if you're an academic or you're studying landscape change or you're looking at medieval landscapes, you can pull from those as well. So they're significant on a whole range of different levels.
I suppose the theme of Heritage Week this year is living heritage, and it's very much so, and that's what we're very lucky to have, the original survey, but that's what's lovely about the next survey, because we are, and as you say, with the public consultation, we'd be encouraging entire families to come along, because you know it's important that the school children come in and see this and learn it, because change, it's like a tradition. Traditions change.
The project in Louth was with the IFA, so we had them very much on board. So we had a network of volunteers who were collecting placements, but I did go into a lot of kitchen tables and had the maps on the table. And a lot of farmers they'd know their own farms, but they'd know all the neighbouring farms as well, because it's a collaborative. When they were children, they're helping out their neighbours, they're going over to their neighbours' land. So you have these wonderful kind of social networks. And I also just thought you might have one person who knows like 20 field names, and they might be the only person who knows it, you know. And somebody else might know a few of those, but another batch. So you kind of have these overlapping mental landscapes that are just they're guardians of this really kind of important but like very delicate aspect of our living heritage. You know, oral history, it's very important, but it's delicate as well, isn't it? So.
Oh yeah, you also remember that it's probably the timing is good, because hopefully we're capturing names of a countryside that is disappearing.
Yeah.
Because if you look at farming the way it's going now, look at the size of fields that you hear in a farm. I mean, I see a field now of 50 acres. When I was growing up, that was an average size farm. And it's one field now. It might have been 50 years ago or 100 years ago.
Yeah.
So we will be capturing a world that's either gone or fast disappearing.
We've talked about field names, but there are, of course, other types of rural place names as well. So there's like lanes, they're often named after people, and sometimes you can track down that was somebody who lived there in 1820, or you can bring in the historical documents to a small extent. But you've got things like, I suppose in crossroads or trees or rocks. There was a lovely name up in the Cooley Mountains, Cluck Immerhin Nagarthy, where people used to play cards. It was a big rock when they'd be crossing the mountain. or places where people would gather for crossroads dances, or to do with, we heard a little bit about 1798, but various different kinds of political violence where maybe a landlord's agent was shot in the 19th century, and that spot on the road was named after them, or the hollow in a road where something or other happened. So they encode a lot of different kinds of social history as well. And some of them are really funny as well. There's this great humour. There was a field in Louth called the Hungry Field, and it was called that because there was a ploughman working there in the 1920s who was moaning about being hungry, and they were slagging him off, and they called it the Hungry Field because of that. So there's this really amazing humour in there as well.
As Heritage Officer, we're doing the Heritage Plan. We've done quite a lot of consultation last year. The one thing that I was hoping I'd hear would be place names and field names. That has really resonated to my ear over the last couple of months of people wanting this. So I was hoping to get into this space. Carlow County Council were delighted to go to tender and to award the tender to Dr. Eve Campbell of Archaeological Monuments and Solutions to do this project. And we're really excited by it, but I'm also excited to say that Pat O'Neill, along with Conor Moriarty, the architect in Carlow County Council, and John Shortall, County Librarian, are working as a steering group for this committee, for this project, because it's quite important for heritage projects that it's always collaborative, not just with communities, but within the local authority, because ultimately people always feel, well, we do this project, where can it go? You, Pat, with your colleagues in Chaz, a few years ago, actually we're getting to that stage, and we want to expand on it. We ultimately want this, and we're hoping it will become a county-wide survey so that we can compete with the other small county in Ireland, which is Louth. But most importantly, that this information now will be brought into the planning process and with all future decision making. So at the moment, we also are due to appoint very shortly, literally in days, a consultant to do a heritage-led regeneration plan for Carlow Town. So all of these actions will be feeding into this, and these plans are all based on public consultation. So that's where we're going with this.